Hey y'all, I'm Mickey Gousset, and thanks for coming back for the next episode in my Introduction to GitHub Actions video series. Now, before we get started, yes, I did end up having to get a splint for my hand. I mentioned yesterday I took a fall. I did end up having to get a splint for my hand, and I bring this up because I am going to fumble things even worse than normal, right? With my mouse and with my keyboard, so hopefully you'll just bear with me. Now, in previous videos, we've talked about what GitHub Actions workflows are. We looked at chaining jobs together. We looked at how you can access the GitHub context object. We looked at how you can deal with variables. So we've set enough of a groundwork now where we're almost at the point to actually cover a real world example, which is going to be doing a build and test on a pull request and doing deployments on a push. But before we do that, there's a couple of other concepts that we need to cover. And one of those is what's called actions. Now, GitHub Actions is the name of the product, but also each of those individual steps that you have in your workflow file. So those steps where we had the little run commands, those can also execute what's called a GitHub action. And to really generalize it, a GitHub action is some code that someone has written that you're going to use in that step. So let's take, for example, checking out your code. Almost every workflow is going to require you to check out some code more than likely. So if we switch over, here we are again in my GitHub Actions DevOps repository. And we have the My GitHub Actions presentation repository. That's the public repository that we've been using for all the different demos that we're doing in this series. It's public, so please, I encourage you to fork it. I encourage you to star it. I encourage you to even contribute back. Now, if we go into the .github workflows folder and we go into workflows, so this is the pull request that we're going to use when we talk about doing a PR on a build. But all I really want to focus on is this first step right here. This step checks out the code. Now, I could have used a run step. Remember, we've used run steps for almost everything else in this, or for everything so far in our pipelines. So I could have used a run step here, and I could have done a git clone and written my own code to check out the repository. But I don't need to do that because the GitHub Actions team has actually created an action for me to do this. So, and as you can see, to use this in a step, I give the step a name. And then I have this keyword uses. That is the magic sauce right there, because that says I want to use an action created by somebody else. Or it could be an action that you've created, a custom action that you've created that either can be accessed from the marketplace or maybe you've just created inside your enterprise. And we're going to cover creating custom actions in future videos down the road. So we've established that the uses command allows us to use an action from somewhere else. So the next question is, how do you reference that action? And how did I know this action existed? Well, I know this action existed for a couple of different reasons. I've seen it in a bunch of other workflows, and I also saw it at the marketplace. And we'll go look at the marketplace in just a moment. But when we go and look at it at the marketplace, when you reference an action, you're usually referencing it by organization name / repository name. Then you use the @ symbol, and then you need to specify a version. What version of the action you're going to reference. In this case, I'm referencing v4, and I'll explain a little more what that means here shortly. But yes, what this means is any action that exists in the marketplace has to be in a public repo. So that means I can go to github.com/actions/checkout and see the code for this action. Now, if this was a custom action I had created in my enterprise environment, then I would maybe be referencing my organization, my repository. And there are some switches you throw to make it available throughout your enterprise or throughout your organization. But in this case, I'm using public actions here. This is a public action. It was actually created by the actions team. So let's go to the marketplace and kind of understand how I found this action and how this works. So the marketplace is located at github.com/marketplace. Now what I've done here is I'd already done a search for checkout earlier. So let's back that up just a little bit. And what I want to show you is at github.com/marketplace, we've got Copilot extensions, we've got models where you can play with different LLMs. We've got GitHub Apps, which are another way of doing automation inside of GitHub. I can do some videos on GitHub Apps sometime if you're interested. And then we have GitHub Actions. Now, GitHub Actions are actions that have been created by the GitHub team, actions that have been created by what we call verified creators, and then actions that have been created by anyone in the community. In fact, I think there's over 20,000 actions right now in the GitHub Marketplace. In fact, I even have an action out here, which will tell you a dad joke, which we'll look at in a second. But for now, with almost any pipeline, we need to be able to check out our code. So if I do a search for a checkout action, you're going to see I get back 82 results. So there are 82 different actions in the GitHub Marketplace. Some that have been created by GitHub, by the GitHub team. And a lot of these have just been created by different people. This one, for example, is the action that was created by GitHub. And you'll notice also that it has this tag on it called verified creator. So when you go to create an action inside of GitHub, you can if you see an action that says it was made by a verified creator, that means that we are verifying that GitHub built that action, or Docker built that action, or Checkmarks built that action. So we've done our verification to prove that they built the actual action. A lot of the actions in the marketplace are not going to have verified creator on them. For example, if I come back out here and I do a search for my dad joke action, this is my dad joke action. It returns a random dad joke. It was built by me. You can see it's even in my Mickey Gousset org. But you'll notice that I don't have a verified creator on there. So I'm not a verified creator. I'm just somebody off on the internet who decided to make a action that tells you a dad joke. But let's go back to the checkout action. And if we look at the checkout action, then what you see here on the marketplace page is essentially the README file that's in the repository as well. So if you've created a good custom action that you've then put out in the marketplace, you usually provide a really nice README that explains how to use that action. So for example, this shows, you call the action by saying uses action/checkout, v4 being the latest major version. And then it has all of these different parameters that you can potentially use with this particular action. Now, every action is different. Every action is going to have different types of parameters that it can use. But this actions.checkout does a really good job of explaining all the different parameters are available, explaining the different scenarios where you might want to use it. And ultimately, as I mentioned before, at the end of the day, to call this action at its most basic, you simply just do a uses action/checkout at v4. Now, here's the thing to know about actions in the marketplace. GitHub doesn't scan those. So you need to do your own due diligence for what you want to use inside the marketplace. But any action in the marketplace has to be in a public repo. Now, and as I mentioned earlier, you can access that repository by just going to github.com/the action name, in this case, actions checkout. So if I click the link right here, This will take me to the public repository for the checkout action, which is at github.com/action/checkout. And I can see all the code that makes up this action. I can open up the code. I can review the code. I can, make sure it works the way I want it to work. And I feel comfortable with how it works. At this point, you don't have to know how to build the actions. You just have to know that all of the actions from the GitHub Marketplace are in a public repository. So you can review all of those actions. Now, when you create a custom action, if you want to put it in a public repository, you can. If you want to put it in a private repository, because maybe it's just for your company, and so just for your enterprise or just your organization, you can do that as well. Now, the last thing I'll mention to you about this, because we were talking about the uses statement and the fact that you had to specify a version. So when you call this action, you have to specify an @ and a version name, a version. There's 3 different ways to specify the version of the action that you're going to want to use. The first is via a tag. So this @v4, that's just a tag that's been made on the repository. So for example, if we go to releases and we do a search and we flip over and look at tags, we can see there's a v4.2.2 tag that's the latest. Here's the v4, which is the latest major release. And we can see all the different versions that we had previously. So referencing an action via a tag is one way of referencing the action. Another way of referencing the action on that uses statement is instead of saying @v4, you could say @ and a branch name. So you could say @main or @dev. This works well for actions when you're building them, but I don't recommend that you have a production action where you're pointing at the branch, because if the branch changes, you're potentially going to break the action. And then finally, the third way to reference the action and the most secure way is you can say @ and a commit SHA. So the actual commit of the action that you're wanting to run against. So instead of saying @v4, I could say, if we come out here and we look at the commit for the v4 tag, I could say @ and this commit and reference that commit in the uses statement as well. But key takeaways from this are multiple ways to specify the version, using the commit being the most secure. All actions in the marketplace are public, so you can review the code. You can see how they're built if you want to. If we go back to github.com/marketplace, and we go to actions, and just for grins, we do a search for dad joke, as we did earlier. This is the action that I created that tells you a dad joke. And I give you the basics of how to use the action. This joke outputs a value, so I'll show you how you can get the output value to display it if you want to. Again, it's just a fun little action that I put together. So anyone can contribute public actions to the GitHub Marketplace. You simply have to create it in a public repository. Now, we haven't talked about how you create custom actions yet, but we will do that in a future video as well. So what I normally recommend to people when I'm working with them is that when they want to do something, like for example, let's say they want to run a Sonar Cube scan. I recommend that they first come out here and do a search to see if they can find an action. And in this case, for example, if you want to do a Sonar Cube scan, there's the official Sonar Cube scan. Looks like it's from somebody that is verified, and we have verified that it was built by Sonar Source. So this is an official action from Sonar that you can use to do your Sonar Cube scans, and it walks you through all the details of how to do that. Or let's say, for example, I needed to do something with Docker. What if I do a search for Docker? We have a lot of different actions out here that have been built by Docker itself. So I always recommend that as you're building your GitHub action workflows, that you come out to the marketplace and see if somebody's already built something that will do what you need versus completely building it by yourself. Now, sometimes you might still want to build it by yourself, and that's fine, but it doesn't hurt to go look to see if there's other stuff out there that will save you some time. Now, the other thing I also remember or also recommend, and we'll go back to my dad joke action for this, is that if you find an action that you like, I recommend that you star the repository. Because one of the ways that I and many others use to determine if that's an action I want to use is to see how many stars the repository has, because that shows that other people are using it and other people have gotten value from it. So if you find an action that you like, star it. Also, remember, these are all public repos. So if you have suggestions for changes, then go open a pull request or go open an issue. Looks like I have an open pull request in here right now. That came from StackLock. So I've got a video earlier on my channel about using StackLock, and so StackLock added that particular pull request. But you can see that I had a fix that was given to me back in January from the community on that was fixing up some environment issues that I had. So give back, I guess is what I'm trying to say when you're dealing with these things from the marketplace. So if we go back to the marketplace, I think that is the major things I wanted you to see from the marketplace. You need to know that when you're looking at actions in the marketplace, there are actions that have been built by GitHub. How do you know they've been built by GitHub? Well, normally you'll see things like if you do a search for the action, like if we do a checkout and we look at that action, then it shows me that this was built by the Actions team. Anything built by the Actions team is part of by the GitHub Actions team. So if we go to that Actions organization, you can actually see all these different actions that have been built by the GitHub team. Every repository is usually its own action. Now, there are some cases where a repository might contain multiple actions, but in general, for the most part, usually you put a custom action in its own repository. Also something good to know. So we're going to be making use of a lot of actions from the GitHub Actions team in our next couple of videos, as well as a couple of actions from the community as well. So in the next video that we've got going on here, we're going to actually go back to that workflow that I showed you a little bit earlier on the pull request. And we're going to look at building a workflow that will run on a pull request, that will build my code and test my code, and how we can make that workflow required, meaning that I can't merge my code until that workflow completes successfully. So that's going to be the next video that we go with. So now, next video, we are diving into the real world stuff. We're building out a real world example. But I needed to show you kind of where some of the actions are coming from. And we'll probably cover a little bit of this more again in tomorrow's video, but I kind of needed to show you a little bit where the actions were coming from so that you understood what was going on there. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I feel like this was probably a little bit of a disjointed video because I'm a little distracted with my finger, but hopefully you got something out of it. Let me know what you think of it. I've been told I'm supposed to say, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and smash that bell. That sounds weird coming from me, I think, but it does help. So I really would I've been getting some nice comments from people. I've been getting some suggestions for future videos from people. This is great. So keep it all coming. Also, I put out on LinkedIn and X and also Blue Sky about doing an office hours kind of thing where, maybe I fire up like a YouTube live or a Twitch or something, maybe even a Teams call or a Zoom call or something where you can come on, ask me questions. I'll do my best to answer them. Or if I can't answer them, I'll go find you an answer and we'll bring it back up in a future call. So purely kind of an unscripted office hours, you ask me questions, I give you answers type of thing. If that is something that you think you'd be interested in, let me know. comment on this video and let me know that you'd be interested in the office hours. Because if I see enough interest, I'll give it a shot. And then if it takes off, we'll just keep doing it. Why not? All right. Well, I appreciate you hanging out with me in this video. Thanks for listening to me ramble. Next video, we're going to dive into building that real world workflow that runs on a pull request. Thanks for watching.